The gavel satisfies something primal in those who wield it. The crack of polished wood against the block, the way sound travels through marble hallways and settles into the bones of everyone present. For 19 years, Judge Patricia Whitmore had wielded hers like a scepter, and the citizens of Fulton County had learned to fear its fall. But on this particular morning in May, inside the Georgia State Capitol building, a different gavel commanded the room. Commissioner Harold Washington, 72 years old, former state Supreme Court justice, held it loosely in his weathered hand as he surveyed the crowd that had packed the Judicial Conduct Commission chamber to capacity. Reporters lined the back wall. Camera operators jockeyed for position. The gallery seats overflowed with attorneys, advocates, and ordinary citizens who had driven from across the state because word travels fast when the powerful face judgment. At the respondents' table, Patricia Whitmore sat rigid beside her attorney, Bernard Knox. Her blonde hair, now more silver than gold at the temples, was pulled back severely. Her reading glasses rested on the table before her. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled almost imperceptibly. Commissioner Washington cleared his throat. The murmur of the crowd died instantly. This session of the Georgia Judicial Conduct Commission will now come to order. We will hear opening remarks from the complainant. Mr. Marcus Pemberton, please approach. In the third row of the gallery, a man rose. He moved with deliberate calm through the narrow aisle between packed seats. His khaki jacket was visibly worn at the elbows. His tie hung slightly crooked. His shoes, though polished, showed the creases of age and use. Patricia Whitmore watched him approach. Recognition flickered across her face, followed immediately by confusion. She had seen this man before. Recently. But where? The man reached the witness table at the front of the chamber. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he stood for a moment surveying the room with eyes that seemed to catalog every face, every reaction. Commissioner Washington leaned forward. Mr. Pemberton, please state your full name and occupation for the record. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Even the reporters stopped their typing. The man in the worn jacket looked directly at Patricia Whitmore. Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them. Not hatred, not triumph, something colder. Something that spoke of patience and precision. My name is Marcus Elijah Pemberton. He paused. Let the silence stretch. And my occupation is Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. For 3 full seconds, nothing moved. Then chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashed, voices exploded into the carefully controlled silence. Commissioner Washington's gavel cracked against its block once, twice, 3 times, struggling to restore order. At the respondents' table, Patricia Whitmore had gone absolutely white. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. Marcus Pemberton did not move, did not react. He simply stood at the witness table, waiting for the chaos to subside, his face an absolute mask of controlled calm. Commissioner Washington's gavel finally restored something approaching order. Judge Pemberton, the commission needs to understand how a sitting federal appellate judge came to file a complaint about a family court proceeding. Marcus Pemberton finally sat. He placed his hands flat on the table before him. 6 weeks ago, Commissioner, I walked into Judge Whitmore's courtroom wearing this jacket. I had no attorney. I had no credentials displayed. I was just another black father trying to fight for his daughter's medical care. His voice carried through the chamber without amplification, rich and measured. Judge Whitmore gave me 90 seconds before she called me a deadbeat, laughed at me in open court, and had security remove me for the crime of citing a Georgia statute. He leaned forward slightly. She made one mistake. She assumed I was powerless. Patricia Whitmore made a small sound, the sound of someone watching everything they had built begin to crumble. She was wrong. 6 weeks earlier. The alarm never rang at 4 in the morning, but Marcus Pemberton's eyes opened anyway. 32 years of early mornings had trained his body to wake before the world stirred back when he was a young public defender in Birmingham preparing for cases that would determine whether fathers saw their children. He lay still for a moment in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to the sounds of the apartment. The hum of the old refrigerator, the distant rumble of early morning traffic on Peachtree Street, the soft wheeze of the air conditioning unit that should have been replaced 2 years ago. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a galley kitchen that opened into a living area barely large enough for a couch and a television he rarely watched. The rent was $800 a month, cheap by Atlanta standards, but still a stretch on months when unexpected expenses arose. And there were always unexpected expenses. Marcus rose, moving quietly through the pre-dawn shadows to the kitchen. On the counter, arranged in the careful order of someone who faced each bill as an enemy to be defeated, lay the month's obligation: electric bill $127, water and sewage $43. The minimum payment on the credit card he had been forced to open when Maya's diagnosis first came through, $215 that barely touched the interest, and then separate from the others printed on thicker paper, and weighted with more zeros the invoice from the pediatric endocrinology clinic. $1,247 for Maya's insulin and supplies, a number that renewed itself every 30 days like clockwork. He opened his laptop and logged into his bank account. The number that greeted him was $62.17. 32 years climbing the legal profession. 6 years on the federal appellate bench. One of 17 judges whose decisions shaped the law for 3 states and 37 million citizens. $62. The irony was not lost on him. Federal judges were well compensated by any reasonable standard. His salary was substantial enough to live comfortably in most circumstances. But circumstances had not been ordinary for nearly 4 years now, not since Eleanor had died in that accident on I-85. He closed the laptop without looking at the bills again. Some mornings required compartmentalization, the deliberate setting aside of problems that could not be solved in the pre-dawn darkness. Today was one of those mornings. He moved to the small bathroom, showered quickly, and stood before the mirror. The face that looked back at him was 56 years old and showed it. Gray threaded through his close-cropped hair. Lines had carved themselves around his eyes and mouth, the topography of decades spent reading documents by fluorescent light and weighing arguments that would affect thousands of lives. But the eyes themselves remained sharp. Dark brown, nearly black, with an intensity that had unnerved opposing counsel for decades, and now served to focus the attention of attorneys arguing before his appellate panel. He dressed carefully, but not elaborately. Gray slacks slightly worn at the knee. A white dress shirt that had survived countless launderings. A tie he had bought at a department store closing sale 3 years ago. And over it all, draped across the back of his desk chair where he had placed it the night before, a khaki jacket. The jacket was new to him, though far from new. $15 at a thrift store in Decatur, purchased specifically for today. It was the kind of jacket that said nothing about the man who wore it. Working class. Unassuming. Invisible. Marcus slipped it on and looked at himself in the full-length mirror that hung on his closet door. The transformation was subtle but complete. The federal judge who commanded respect in oak-paneled courtrooms had disappeared. In his place stood a man who might work maintenance at an office building, who might drive for a rideshare service, who might be any of 10,000 black men in Atlanta struggling to make ends meet. That was the point. He moved through the apartment to the second bedroom, easing the door open with practiced silence. Maya slept sprawled across her narrow bed, one arm flung over her head, the other curled around a stuffed elephant named Senator that she had had since she was 3. The walls of her room were painted pale pink, decorated with posters of pop stars Marcus did not recognize, and images from the space program that he very much did. She was 8 years old. Gap-toothed smile since losing her front teeth 3 months ago, though the new ones were already pushing through. Hair in neat braids that her grandmother had done last weekend during their Sunday visit. A glucose monitor adhered to her upper arm, the small device that tracked her blood sugar continuously and sent alerts to both Marcus's phone and her mother's in Chicago. Type 1 diabetes. Diagnosed 6 months ago, the words falling from the pediatrician's lips like stones into still water. Insulin dependent for the rest of her life. Careful monitoring. Diet management. The constant vigilance required to keep a child's body from destroying itself. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched his daughter sleep. The rise and fall of her chest, the small sounds she made halfway between snoring and sighing. The absolute peace of a child who did not yet understand how complicated the world could be. On the nightstand beside her bed, propped against her lamp, was a photograph in a simple frame. Marcus and Maya at the beach last summer, sand in their hair, her small hand wrapped around his finger as they watched the sunset paint the water gold. It was her favorite picture, she had told him, the one she looked at when she missed him most. Maya stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, found him standing in the doorway, and a sleepy smile spread across her face. "Daddy? You're up early." "Gotta go to court today, baby girl." She pushed herself up on her elbows, suddenly more alert. "Your court. A different one. Family court. About the stuff with Mommy's lawyers." Maya's face fell slightly. She understood more than an 8-year-old should about custody arrangements and medical bills and the complicated dance of co-parenting across 800 miles. "Are you going to win?" Marcus crossed to her bed and sat on the edge. She immediately crawled into his lap, tucking her head beneath his chin in a gesture so familiar it felt like breathing. "I'm going to try, baby. I always try." "I know." Her voice was muffled against his chest. "Daddy, yeah. Do you love me bigger than the sky?" He tightened his arms around her. This ritual question, asked and answered 1,000 times since she was old enough to form the words, never failed to crack something open in his chest. "Bigger than the sky, baby girl. Bigger than all the stars in it." She pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that sometimes startled him. "Then you'll win, because people who love that much don't lose." He kissed her forehead and eased her back down onto her pillow. "Go back to sleep. Grandma's coming at 7 to take you to school." "Daddy, yeah, baby. When you win, does that mean I get to live with you again, like before?" The question landed like a physical blow. Before meant before the diagnosis, when the custody arrangement had been simpler, when summers with Daddy and school years with Mommy had seemed workable. Now, with Maya's condition requiring constant monitoring and her mother's insurance being the only coverage available that kept the costs from being utterly catastrophic, the calculus had shifted. "We'll figure it out, baby. I promise." "Okay." She closed her eyes, already drifting back toward sleep. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, sweetheart. More than anything." He watched her for another moment, then slipped out of the room and pulled the door almost closed behind him. In the kitchen, the bills waited. On the counter beside the refrigerator, held by a magnet Maya had made at summer camp, was another photograph. This one showed Marcus in his judicial robes standing before the seal of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals on the day of his investiture ceremony 6 years ago. His mother stood beside him, weeping with pride. His daughter, then only 2, perched on his hip. 6 years ago he had believed the hard work was finally paying off. Birmingham public defender to assistant U.S. attorney to federal prosecutor to finally a lifetime appointment to one of the most prestigious courts in the nation, the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything his parents had sacrificed for. And then, Eleanor had died, and Maya had been diagnosed, and Denise had remarried a man in Chicago who sold insurance and drove a BMW and had opinions about how child support should be calculated. Marcus turned away from the photograph and picked up his keys. He could have made this all go away. One phone call, one piece of letterhead with the seal of the United States courts. Professional courtesy would have taken care of the rest. The modification request would vanish. The hearing would be continued indefinitely. Questions would never be asked, but that was not what he needed to know. He had heard the stories, whispered accounts from public defenders he had known in Birmingham, statistical analyses buried in academic journals, complaints filed with judicial conduct commissions that went nowhere, disappeared into filing cabinets, and bureaucratic silence. The stories said that fathers without lawyers received 90 seconds, while fathers with lawyers received 7 minutes. That outcomes correlated with race in ways that defied coincidence. That certain judges ran their courtrooms like fiefdoms accountable to no one, protected by a system that looked after its own. He needed to know if the stories were true, not as an abstract matter of judicial interest, as a lived experience, as a father with a daughter who was counting on him. Marcus Pemberton, federal appellate judge, walked out of his apartment into the pre-dawn darkness. The man who would walk into the Fulton County Family Courthouse in 4 hours would be someone else entirely. Someone powerless. Someone dismissed. Someone who had no recourse except the broken system itself. He needed to know, and the only way to know was to become invisible. The Fulton County Family Courthouse occupied a concrete block on Pryor Street that had been built in 1974 and renovated never. 3 stories of institutional gray, it squatted between a bail bonds office and a check-cashing store like an afterthought in the landscape of downtown Atlanta. Marcus arrived at 8:45, parking in the rear lot among minivans with rusted wheel wells and pickup trucks with faded paint. These were the vehicles of people who could not afford to miss work, but could not afford not to appear. Parents fighting for time with their children. Grandparents seeking custody. Spouses dissolving unions that had once promised forever. He sat in his car for a moment, watching the stream of humanity flow toward the courthouse entrance. A young woman struggled to extract a stroller from her trunk while balancing a toddler on her hip, files slipping from beneath her arm. An elderly black man moved slowly up the sidewalk, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, his face set with the determination of someone who had been fighting this battle for a very long time. Marcus stepped out of his car and approached the woman with the stroller. "Can I help you with that?" She looked up. Startled, assessed him quickly. Black man, 50s worn jacket, working class, not a threat. "Thank you, I've got it." "You sure I've got 2 free hands and nowhere to be for an hour?" She hesitated, then nodded. The stroller had caught on something. He freed it, unfolded. It held it steady while she strapped in the toddler. "Thank you. Really?" "No problem. What's your case about, if you don't mind me asking?" "Custody modification." Her laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who had learned that the family court system was not designed for people like her. "My ex wants to reduce his weekends because his new girlfriend doesn't like having kids around. And the court is entertaining this. The court entertains everything when you've got a good enough lawyer. He's got money. I've got..." She gestured at herself at the stroller, at the chaos of her morning. "This. What time's your hearing?" 11:15, yours and 10:30. "Which judge?" "Whitmore, Patricia Whitmore." The woman's expression shifted. Something between sympathy and warning crossed her face. "Good luck. You'll need it with that one." "Bad. Let's just say I had her 3 months ago. She gave me maybe 2 minutes before she decided I was wasting her time. Didn't look at a single piece of paper I brought." Marcus filed this information away. Data point 1. "I'm Marcus, by the way. Tamara Jenkins." She extended her hand and he shook it. "Seriously, good luck. And if it goes badly, don't beat yourself up. With Whitmore, it almost always goes badly for people like us." She headed toward the courthouse entrance, stroller wheels squeaking on the pavement. Marcus followed at a distance, already beginning to construct a mental map of the patterns he would need to document. Security took 11 minutes. He emptied his pockets, removed his belt, placed his folder of documentation on the conveyor belt, and walked through the metal detector. It beeped. "Step aside, sir." The officer was young, mid-20s, with a name tag that read Dawson. He ran the handheld wand over Marcus slowly, thoroughly, taking his time in a way that felt less like procedure and more like performance. "Purpose of your visit: family court hearing at 10:30. You got representation, representing myself." Officer Dawson raised an eyebrow. The corner of his mouth twitched toward a smirk. "Good luck with that. Whitmore doesn't go easy on walk-ins." Data point 2. The reputation preceded the judge even to the security checkpoint. "I'll manage." That's what they all say. Marcus collected his belongings and moved toward the stairs. The elevator was marked out of order, a handwritten sign taped to the doors that looked like it had been there for months. Budget cuts made visible. Services deferred. The infrastructure of justice crumbling in plain sight. The family court waiting area was on the second floor. A row of plastic chairs bolted to the floor, most of them occupied. An elderly black man with a cane, the same man Marcus had seen in the parking lot, sat at one end staring at nothing. A young white woman tried to manage two children who climbed over the furniture. A Hispanic man in work boots and a construction company shirt studied papers in his lap with the intensity of someone who understood that his entire future rested on words he barely understood. Marcus took a seat at the end of the row and opened his folder. Inside was everything the law required: medical bills documenting Maya's insulin costs and specialist visits, insurance correspondence showing the $12,000 deductible on Denise's husband's plan, records of his own offer to add Maya to his federal employee health benefits, which would eliminate the deductible entirely, and copies of the letters from Denise's attorney rejecting both offers. They did not want solutions. They wanted leverage. They wanted the paper trail that would allow them to return to court again and again, using their daughter's health as a weapon. At 9 o'clock precisely, a clerk emerged from the courtroom, mid-30s, hair pulled back tight, the expression of someone who processed 500 cases a week and had long since stopped seeing the human beings behind the docket numbers. "Patterson, Rodriguez, Williams. First block, front 2 rows inside." The elderly man with the cane struggled to stand. Marcus watched him grip the armrest, push himself up with visible effort. No one offered assistance. He made it to his feet on his own and shuffled toward the courtroom doors. Marcus approached the clerk's desk. "Excuse me. I'm Pemberton. Marcus Pemberton. I'm on the 10:30 docket." She did not look up. Her fingers scrolled across a tablet. "Pemberton. Child support modification. Petitioner Denise Pemberton Hartley versus respondent Marcus Pemberton." "That's correct. You've been moved to 115. Sit in the back until called." The notice specified 10:30. Now she looked up. Something flickered in her eyes. Not hostility, annoyance. The particular irritation reserved for people who did not understand how things worked around here. "Schedule changed. Court's discretion. You can wait until 1:15 or you can stipulate to the petitioner's demands and go home. Your choice. Was I notified of this change? You're being notified now." Data point 3. Scheduling manipulation. Whether systematic or arbitrary, the effect was the same: disorientation, inconvenience, the message that the court's time mattered and his did not. "I'll wait." He returned to the plastic chairs and took a seat in the back row, opened his notepad, and began to write. The next 3 hours became a masterclass in institutional indifference. From his seat in the waiting area, Marcus could hear fragments of what happened inside courtroom 3B. The door opened and closed every 20 minutes or so. Batches of litigants emerged, some relieved, most wearing the particular numbness of people who had just been processed by a system that had never seen them as individuals. At 11, he entered the courtroom and took a seat in the gallery. He needed to observe before his own case was called. Judge Patricia Whitmore presided from an elevated bench at the front of the room. Early 60s blonde hair going gray at the temples, reading glasses perched on her nose. She sat with the particular posture of a woman who had occupied that position for 19 years and had forgotten what it felt like to earn respect rather than demand it. The pattern crystallized within minutes. Litigants with attorneys received 5 to 7 minutes each. Professional courtesies were exchanged. Negotiations were conducted in the language of legal procedure. Outcomes were predetermined but dressed in the appearance of due process. Litigants appearing without representation received 2 minutes, sometimes less. A young black father approached the podium. His case was a visitation dispute. He held a folder thick with documentation, the same kind of folder Marcus carried. "Your Honor, I have evidence that my ex-wife has been denying my scheduled weekends. Text messages, emails, a calendar showing, Mr. Davis." Whitmore's voice cut through like a blade. "This court doesn't have time for your conspiracy theories about your ex-wife. She's the custodial parent. She makes the decisions. But, Your Honor, the custody agreement specifically states, the custody agreement says what I say it says. Motion denied. Next case." "Your Honor, please. I haven't seen my son in 3 months. If you would just look at bailiff." Whitmore waved her hand in a gesture that was theatrical dismissive. "If Mr. Davis isn't seated in 5 seconds, remove him from my courtroom." The young father sat. His documentation remained in his folder. Unseen. Unconsidered. Marcus wrote in his notepad, "Black male pro se denied opportunity to present evidence. Hearing time 47 seconds. The pattern continued. An elderly Hispanic woman attempting to gain temporary custody of her grandchildren while their mother completed rehabilitation. Whitmore interrupted her after 30 seconds. "Ma'am, do you have a lawyer?" "No, Your Honor." "Then file the proper paperwork and come back when you understand how this works." Next. A white man in a golf shirt explaining why he needed to reduce his child support because he had started a new business. Whitmore listened attentively, asked questions, granted a 3-month review period with reduced payments in the interim. "I understand starting a business is difficult, Mr. Crawford. The court wants to support fathers who are trying to build something for their families." 8 minutes of judicial attention, sympathy, understanding. The grandmother trying to save her grandchildren from foster care, 45 seconds, and contempt. The businessman trying to pay less for children he rarely saw, 8 minutes, and compassion. Marcus filled 3 pages of notes before his name was finally called. Pemberton, Marcus Pemberton. He rose, gathered his folder, and walked toward the courtroom doors. The elderly man with the cane, Mr. Patterson Marcus, had learned from the clerk's earlier call, caught his eye as he passed. The old man shook his head slowly. A warning. A wish of luck. A recognition of what was coming. Marcus nodded and entered courtroom 3B. The room was smaller than it appeared from the gallery. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The American flag hung limply beside the Georgia state flag. Judge Whitmore's bench loomed above the podium where respondents stood to receive judgment. At the petitioner's table, a lawyer Marcus did not recognize sat with a thin file. Expensive suit designer watched the kind of attorney who charged $400 an hour to process custody disputes for clients who could afford to weaponize the system. Beside him, a video screen displayed Denise's face. She was appearing remotely from Chicago. Of course she was. 800 miles, and she could not be bothered to show up in person for a hearing about their daughter's medical care. "Mr. Pemberton." Whitmore did not look up from her papers. "You're the respondent in case 2024 FC 441. Petitioner seeks modification of child support pursuant to the minor child's increased medical expenses." "Yes, Your Honor." "I see you're appearing pro us." "Yes, Your Honor, I'm representing myself today." Now Whitmore looked up. Her eyes swept over him. The worn khaki jacket, the department store tie, the folder of documents in his hands. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Marcus had spent 32 years reading faces in courtrooms. He saw it. Dismissal. Categorization. The instant judgment of a woman who had already decided what he was before he had spoken a complete sentence. Mr. Pemberton, before we proceed, I want to make something clear. Whitmore removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench with a deliberate click. This court takes child support obligations very seriously. The welfare of children depends on both parents meeting their financial responsibilities. Do you understand? I understand, Your Honor. Good. Because I've reviewed the petitioner's motion and I have to say the numbers are quite clear. Your daughter's medical expenses have increased substantially. The petitioner is seeking a modification of $1,200 per month to cover those costs. Do you have any response? I do, Your Honor. I've prepared documentation that I would like to present to the court. Documentation. The word hung in the air. Whitmore leaned back in her chair, the gesture theatrical. Mr. Pemberton, let me ask you something. Do you have a lawyer? No, Your Honor. As I said, I'm representing myself. She glanced at the petitioner's attorney. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that Marcus recognized from countless courtrooms. Professional solidarity. The subtle signal that said this one doesn't belong here. Mr. Kendrick does. The petitioner have any objection to Mr. Pemberton presenting his documentation? The attorney stood smoothly. Your Honor, the petitioner's position is straightforward. The child's medical expenses are documented. The respondent's income is documented. The calculation is simple mathematics. We don't believe any additional documentation is necessary. I tend to agree. Whitmore turned back to Marcus. Mr. Pemberton, this is family court, not the Supreme Court. We don't need elaborate presentations. We need parents who meet their obligations. Your Honor, with respect, the documentation I have directly addresses the petitioner's claims. I believe the court would benefit from reviewing it before making a decision. You believe the court would benefit? Whitmore laughed, short, sharp, the sound echoing off the walls. In the gallery, a few people laughed too, nervous, reflexive, the laughter of people who wanted to be on the winning side of a power imbalance. Mr. Pemberton, I've been sitting on this bench for 19 years. I've heard every excuse, every sob story, every creative explanation for why fathers can't pay what they owe. You know what I've learned. Marcus said nothing. He felt the familiar rage building, but kept it leashed, kept his face absolutely neutral. I've learned that fathers who show up with folders full of paper are usually trying to hide something. They think if they throw enough documents at the court won't notice that they're deadbeats trying to avoid their responsibilities. The word landed like a slap. Deadbeat. The same word that some child at Maya's school had used to make his daughter cry. Your Honor, I would like to note for the record that I find that characterization inappropriate and potentially prejudicial. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. I would also like to request that the court review my documentation before rendering judgment. The documents include medical bills showing that I have already offered to pay my daughter's expenses directly, insurance documentation showing that I have offered to add her to my federal employee health plan, which would cover her treatment with no deductible, and correspondence from the petitioner's attorney rejecting both offers. Federal employee health plan? Whitmore's voice dripped sarcasm. What are you, a postal worker? More laughter from the gallery. Marcus felt the temperature of his blood rise, but kept his voice absolutely level. I work for the federal government in a different capacity, Your Honor, but that's not relevant to the documentation I'm trying to present. Mr. Pemberton, Whitmore leaned forward. I decide what's relevant in my courtroom, not you. And what's relevant right now is that you have a daughter with medical needs and you're standing here wasting this court's time with paper instead of stepping up like a real father. I am stepping up, Your Honor. I've offered to pay every medical bill. I've offered insurance coverage that would eliminate the need for a support modification entirely. The petitioner has refused these offers because she knows you'll find a way to weasel out of it. Whitmore cut him off. I've seen it before. Fathers who promise the moon and deliver nothing. Your daughter needs security, Mr. Pemberton. not promises. Your Honor, if you would review the documentation, I've heard enough. Whitmore picked up her gavel. The court finds that the respondent has failed to demonstrate any legitimate basis for opposing the modification. The petitioner's request is granted. Child support is hereby increased by $1,200 per month, effective immediately. She pointed the gavel at Marcus. Additionally, given the respondent's hostile and uncooperative attitude in these proceedings, the court is issuing a warning. Any failure to comply with this order will result in contempt charges. You will be arrested, Mr. Pemberton. You will go to jail. Her voice dropped to something cruel. Jail is full of fathers who thought they could outsmart the system. You don't want to join them. Marcus stood perfectly still. His daughter's medical bills were in his hands. Documentation proving everything he had said. Evidence that would have taken 3 minutes to review. 90 seconds. That was all she had given him. Your Honor, I would like to note my objection for appeal purposes. The gavel froze mid-swing. You'd like to... What? I would like to note my objection. Under Georgia Code Section 15 to 11 to 28, a party has the right to... Mr. Pemberton. Whitmore's face reddened. I don't care what code section you pulled off the internet. This isn't law and order. You don't get to make speeches. Your Honor, I'm entitled to pity bailiff. The security officer was already moving, already walking toward the podium, already reaching for Marcus's arm. Mr. Pemberton is being disruptive. Remove him from my courtroom. I'm not being disruptive. Marcus kept his voice calm, even as the bailiff's hand closed on his arm. I'm attempting to exercise my legal rights. Your legal rights... Whitmore laughed again, louder this time. That's adorable. Another deadbeat father who thinks he knows the law better than the judge. She looked at the gallery. Let me tell you something, Mr. Pemberton. I've forgotten more law than you'll ever learn from Google. People like you come in here with your printouts and your attitude thinking you can challenge 19 years of experience. You can't. You won't. The bailiff's grip tightened. Marcus allowed himself to be turned toward the door. But before he moved, he looked directly at Patricia Whitmore one final time. You will remember this moment, Your Honor. She smiled. The smile of someone who had heard every variation of that phrase and watched every variation walk away, defeated. I'm sure I will, Mr. Pemberton. Have a nice day. Next case. The door closed behind him. Marcus stood in the hallway, his folder still in his hands, 3 months of preparation reduced to nothing by 90 seconds. But Whitmore had made a mistake. A fatal one. She had not asked what he did for a living. Marcus walked out of the courthouse into the April sunshine. His hands were steady now. The rage transformed into something colder and more useful. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How did it go, baby? Did the judge help? He stared at the message for a long moment, composing and discarding responses. Finally, he typed back. Not yet, Mama, but she will. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned at the sound of footsteps behind him. Tamara Jenkins, the woman from the parking lot, had emerged from the courthouse. Her face was wet with tears, but her jaw was set with determination. How'd yours go? She asked. About like you described. 90 seconds, no evidence reviewed, called me a deadbeat. Tamara nodded, unsurprised. Sounds about right. Mine was 2 minutes this time. She said I should be grateful my ex is still willing to see the kids at all. How many times have you been in front of her? 3 in the past year. Each time it's the same. I bring documentation, she doesn't look at it. Marcus felt something clicking into place, the pattern becoming clearer with each data point. Have you ever filed a complaint? Tamara's laugh was hollow. Filed 2, never heard back. A friend of mine filed 3. Same thing, nothing. Who handles the complaints? Some administrator. Caldwell, I think his name is. Marcus filed the name away. Have you ever talked to anyone else about this? Other people who've had similar experiences. Tamara studied him for a moment. Something in his questions had shifted her perception of him. There's a lawyer. Public defender, been documenting Whitmore for years. She gave a talk at my church last year trying to get people to come forward. Dorothy something. Lawson, I think. Dorothy Lawson. Yeah, she's got files on dozens of cases, but she can't get anyone to listen either. Marcus nodded slowly. The shape of something larger was beginning to emerge. Thank you, Tamara. I mean that. For what we both lost today. Marcus looked back at the courthouse. Maybe not. He walked to his car, sat behind the wheel, and pulled out his phone. A quick search brought up Dorothy Lawson's contact information. Public Defender's Office, Fulton County. He dialed before he could second-guess himself. Dorothy Lawson. Ms. Lawson, my name is Marcus Pemberton. I just had a hearing in front of Judge Patricia Whitmore. I understand you've been documenting her conduct for some time. Silence on the other end. Then carefully, who gave you my name? A woman named Tamara Jenkins. She said you have files. More silence. When Dorothy Lawson spoke again, her voice had changed, guarded. Mr. Pemberton, I've been doing this work for 6 years. I've talked to dozens of people who said they wanted to help. Most of them disappear when they realize how hard it is. I understand. Do you? Because what I have isn't just complaints. It's 73 documented cases, statistical analysis, outcome comparisons broken down by race, income level, and representation status. 6 years of my life. 73 cases. 6 years. The numbers hit Marcus like physical blows. And no one will listen. The complaints go to Vincent Caldwell. He's the court administrator. Also happens to be Judge Whitmore's cousin by marriage. Every complaint gets routed through his office before it reaches the investigators. Every complaint comes back marked insufficient documentation. Marcus felt the full scope of the problem settling into focus. Not just a racist judge, a system designed to protect her. Ms. Lawson, I need to see what you have. All of it. Why should I trust you, Mr. Pemberton? For all I know, you're working for Caldwell. I'm not working for anyone except myself and my daughter. Everyone says that. I know. But here's what I can tell you. In about 2 hours, I'm going to make a phone call. That call is going to set something in motion that can't be stopped. Before I make it, I need to know everything. Silence stretched between them. Marcus waited. Finally, Dorothy Lawson spoke. There's a coffee shop on Piedmont 1/2 mile from the courthouse. I can meet you there in an hour. I'll be there. Mr. Pemberton, yes. I've been fighting this battle alone for 6 years. If you're real, if you can actually do something, then I need to know who you are. Marcus considered his answer carefully. I'm someone who experienced what your 73 documented cases experienced. Someone who stood at that podium and was told he didn't matter before he finished his first sentence. And I'm someone who has the ability to make sure this never gets buried again. Another long silence. 1 hour, Mr. Pemberton. Don't be late. The line went dead. Marcus sat in his car looking at the courthouse through his windshield. Somewhere inside, Patricia Whitmore was already calling the next case, already moving on. Already forgetting the black man in the worn jacket she had just humiliated. But Marcus Pemberton would not forget. And soon enough, neither would anyone else. He looked at the photograph of Maya on his phone, her gap-toothed smile radiating joy. I'm going to win, baby girl. Not just for us, for all 73. He started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. She didn't ask what I did for a living. That mistake would cost her everything. The coffee shop on Piedmont Avenue occupied a narrow storefront between a dry cleaner and an accountant's office. Dorothy Lawson was already seated in the back booth when Marcus arrived, her fingers wrapped around a cup that had long since gone cold. She watched him approach with the wariness of someone who had learned to distrust offers of help. Late 40s, hair streaked with gray that she made no effort to hide, eyes that had seen too much injustice and still refused to look away. A thick folder sat on the table beside her. Marcus slid into the seat across from her without preamble. Ms. Lawson. Mr. Pemberton. Her voice carried the particular weariness of someone who had spent 6 years screaming into a void. Before we begin, I need you to understand something. That folder contains the work of my life. 73 families, 6 years of documentation, patterns that should have ended Patricia Whitmore's career a decade ago. She pushed the folder toward him, but kept her hand on it, not yet releasing. I've shared this information before, with journalists who lost interest when their editors killed the story, with politicians who made promises and then vanished, with other attorneys who decided the fight wasn't worth the risk to their careers. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. What happened to them? The journalists found their sources suddenly unwilling to talk. The politicians discovered that campaign contributions from certain legal circles had strings attached. The attorneys started receiving complaints about unrelated cases, enough to keep them too busy to pursue anything else. You're telling me the system protects itself. I'm telling you the system is designed to protect itself. Vincent Caldwell isn't just an administrator, he's a gatekeeper. Every complaint about Whitmore crosses his desk before it reaches the Judicial Conduct Commission. He decides what gets forwarded and what gets lost. Marcus absorbed this information, fitting it into the framework he was building. How is he connected to Whitmore, cousin by marriage? His wife is Whitmore's first cousin. They vacation together in the Florida Keys every summer. Dorothy's mouth twisted. And there's more. Caldwell's brother-in-law runs a company called Family First Collections. They hold the contract for child support enforcement in Fulton County. The implications crystallized immediately. The more cases Whitmore pushes through, the more support orders she issues. The more money flows to Family First. They take 12% of every dollar collected. Whitmore runs a machine, Mr. Pemberton. Fathers are processed as quickly as possible. Modifications are granted without review. Enforcement actions are ordered without question. And the collection fees keep flowing to a company that kicks back to people who protect the pipeline. Marcus felt the scope of the corruption expanding in his mind. This was no longer about one racist judge in one courtroom. This was a system engineered to extract money from vulnerable citizens while denying them any meaningful recourse. Show me everything. Dorothy released the folder. Statistical analysis is in the front section. Average hearing time for black pro se litigants, 2.3 minutes. For white pro se litigants, 5.1 minutes. For represented parties, 7.4 minutes. Marcus flipped through the pages, his legal mind cataloging evidence, identifying patterns, noting the meticulous documentation. Outcome comparisons are next. 78% unfavorable outcomes for black fathers in custody disputes. 34% for white fathers with similar case profiles. These numbers would stand up in federal court. Dorothy leaned forward, something flickering in her eyes. Federal court. That's the second time you've mentioned federal jurisdiction. Who are you, Mr. Pemberton? Marcus closed the folder and looked at her directly. Someone who can make sure this doesn't get buried. Someone with connections that Vincent Caldwell cannot touch. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. But I can promise you this: by the time I'm finished, every one of these 73 families will have their day in court. A real court, with a judge who actually reviews the evidence. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to satisfy something. What do you need from me? Everything. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence you've gathered. And I need to meet the people who are willing to testify. Some of them have been threatened, told that if they come forward, their cases will be reopened and their outcomes will be worse. Then I need to meet those people especially, because threats only work on people who believe they have no options. Marcus's voice carried an edge of cold steel. I'm going to give them options. The next 3 weeks dissolved into a rhythm of documentation and discovery. Marcus met Henry Crawford on a Saturday morning at a diner in East Point. The 73-year-old veteran moved slowly, his wooden cane tapping against the linoleum floor, but his eyes remained sharp and his handshake firm. "Ms. Lawson says you're different from the others." Henry lowered himself into the booth with visible effort. "Says you might actually be able to do something." "Tell me what happened." Henry's story emerged in fragments, each one heavier than the last. His daughter had died 4 years ago, leaving behind 2 children and a husband who remarried within 6 months. The new wife wanted nothing to do with her stepchildren's grandfather. She convinced her husband to file for modification of the visitation agreement. "Judge Whitmore gave me 90 seconds. 90 seconds to explain why a grandfather should be allowed to see his grandchildren." Henry's voice cracked. "She called me a disruptive influence. Said I was probably the reason my daughter had problems in the first place." Marcus felt the familiar rage building, but kept his expression neutral. "Did you file a complaint?" "Filed 3. Never heard back on any of them." Henry's eyes glistened. "My grandson Michael is 9 years old now. Last time I saw him, he was 5. He hid behind his stepfather's leg like I was a stranger." The old man's hand trembled on the table. 4 years, Mr. Pemberton. 4 years of filing papers that disappear into filing cabinets." Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over Henry's. "Mr. Crawford, I'm going to ask you to do something difficult. I'm going to ask you to testify before the Judicial Conduct Commission. To tell your story under oath in public, where Patricia Whitmore and Vincent Caldwell will have to hear it." Henry's chin lifted. Something kindled behind the tears in his eyes. "I served 2 tours in Vietnam and 3 in Desert Storm. You think I'm afraid of some judge? I think you've been fighting this battle alone for too long. That's about to change." The next witness was Tamara Jenkins, whom Marcus already knew from the courthouse parking lot. She arrived at the meeting with her toddler on her hip and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "My ex-husband's new girlfriend doesn't like kids." Her laugh was hollow. "So he filed to reduce his weekends. Judge Whitmore granted it without even looking at our original agreement." "How long was your hearing?" "Maybe 2 minutes. Every time I tried to explain the situation, she cut me off. Said I should be grateful he was still willing to see them at the all." "And when you filed a complaint?" "Nothing. It's like shouting into a hole in the ground." Marcus made notes, asked follow-up questions, and cataloged the details. The pattern repeated itself with each witness. James Williams, a father of 3, had been jailed for contempt when he asked Judge Whitmore to review his disability documentation before increasing his support obligation. Marcus Henderson had lost custody of his daughter after Whitmore ruled that his work schedule was incompatible with responsible parenting despite the fact that he worked the same hours as the child's mother. Darnell Thompson had been denied visitation rights entirely after Whitmore accepted without verification his ex-wife's claim of verbal abuse. 11 witnesses. 11 stories. 11 lives damaged by a system that had never seen them as human beings. Dorothy Lawson sat beside Marcus during many of these interviews, taking notes offering context. "This is more than judicial misconduct," Marcus observed after their 6th meeting. "This is racketeering. Family First Collections is profiting from every case Whitmore pushes through. Caldwell is protecting the pipeline." Dorothy nodded grimly. "I've been saying that for years. But proving it requires access to financial records that I can't get." "I can." Marcus pulled out his phone. "There's someone I need to call." That evening Maya called. Her face on the screen was troubled. The gap-toothed smile that usually greeted him was absent, replaced by something more serious. "Daddy, hey baby girl, how was school?" She did not answer immediately. Her eyes searched his face through the camera. "Something happened today, Daddy." His stomach tightened. "What happened?" "There's this boy, Brandon. He said," her voice caught, "he said his mom told him you're a deadbeat. He said deadbeat means you don't love me enough to pay for my medicine." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His daughter, 8 years old, having to defend him against accusations she did not understand. "Baby." Listen to me. Do you know what deadbeat really means? She shook her head, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. It means someone who doesn't try, someone who gives up, someone who walks away. He leaned closer to the camera, willing her to feel his presence across the 800 miles between them. Have I ever walked away from you? No, Daddy. Have I ever given up? No. Then what does that make me? She sniffled, managing a small smile. Not a deadbeat. That's right. And people who say otherwise don't know what they're talking about. How much do you love me, Daddy? He smiled. Bigger than the sky, baby girl. Bigger than all the stars in it. Bigger than anything those people could ever understand. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Daddy, yeah. Are you coming home? Soon, baby. Summer's coming. You'll be here for a whole month. Promise. I promise. Daddy, yeah, sweetheart. Did you win today at the court? He could lie to her, but Marcus Pemberton had never lied to his daughter. Not today, baby. The judge didn't listen today. Maya's face crumpled slightly, but she pulled herself together. But you'll try again, right? You always try again. I always try again. Then you'll win next time. I know you will. How do you know? She smiled the gap-toothed smile that he loved. Because you love me bigger than the sky, and people who love like that don't give up. After the call ended, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by bills he could not pay and documentation that no one had been willing to review. He opened his laptop and composed an email to David Thornton at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. David, I'm sending you materials related to a family court in Georgia. Pattern or practice violations. Systemic civil rights abuses. The state commission gets it first, but I suspect they'll try to bury it. When they do, I'll need federal backup. He attached Dorothy's files and hit send. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Inspector Diane Foster at the Georgia Judicial Conduct Commission. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Foster was skeptical at first. She received dozens of complaints about Whitmore every year, and none had gone anywhere. Mr. Pemberton, who exactly are you? I'm a father who was denied the opportunity to present evidence in a child support case. I'm a citizen who was called a deadbeat and threatened with jail for exercising my legal rights. I'm one of 73 people who have experienced similar treatment. That's not what I asked. I know, but it's the only answer I can give you right now. Silence on the line. Then, the commission meets May 15th. If you can provide documented evidence of specific violations, I can present your case for formal investigation. I'll have everything you need by May 10th. The call that changed everything came 3 days later at 2 a.m. Marcus had been working late reviewing the final compilation of evidence for submission to Inspector Foster when his phone lit up with Dorothy's name. Marcus. Her voice was wrong, shaking, the voice of someone fighting panic. What happened? My office. Someone broke in. 6 years of files, hard drives, paper copies, everything, they took it all. Marcus was already moving, grabbing his keys, heading for the door. Are you safe? I wasn't there. I came in this morning and everything was... Her voice broke. 6 years, Marcus. 6 years of work. Gone. He arrived at her office 20 minutes later. The door had been forced open with what looked like professional precision. Filing cabinets stood empty, their contents scattered across the floor. But the important materials were missing. Every hard drive, every backup disk, every carefully organized binder. Dorothy sat in her desk chair staring at the destruction with hollow eyes. I have copies, Marcus's voice cut through her shock. Everything you shared with me, I made digital backups, stored in 3 separate locations. Encrypted. She looked up at him. Something flickered in her expression. Hope warring with exhaustion. They know. Caldwell Whitmore, whoever ordered this, they know we're building a case. Which means they're scared. Marcus surveyed the wreckage. People don't commit felony burglary unless they feel threatened. This isn't a sign of strength. It's desperation. Or it's a warning. Dorothy's hands clenched in her lap. What if they come after the witnesses next? Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went pale. What is it? Dorothy turned the phone toward him. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or the little girl learns what it means to lose a father. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, something harder. When did this arrive? Just now. He took a photograph of the message with his own phone, then handed hers back. Forward that to my number, then delete it from your phone. Don't respond. Marcus, they're threatening your daughter. They're threatening a child they've never met using language designed to frighten without being legally actionable, which tells me they're sophisticated enough to know what constitutes a criminal threat and careful enough to stay just below the line. What are we going to do? Marcus looked around the ransacked office one more time. We're going to finish what we started. In 2 weeks, the Judicial Conduct Commission meets. In 2 weeks, I'm going to stand in front of that commission and present evidence that Patricia Whitmore and Vincent Caldwell cannot bury, cannot steal, and cannot threaten into silence. Dorothy stared at him. They just broke into my office. They threatened your daughter. And you want to keep going. They're doing this because they're afraid of what we have. If we stop now, their fear was justified. If we keep going, we prove that fear is the only thing protecting them. He crouched down to her level, his voice dropping. 6 years, Dorothy. You spent 6 years building this case when no one would listen, when everyone told you it was hopeless. You didn't give up then. Don't give up now, not when we're this close. Something shifted in her expression. The exhaustion remained, but beneath it, a spark of the determination that had sustained her through 6 years of futile battles. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And when it's over, Henry Crawford is going to see his grandchildren. Tamara Jenkins is going to have her custody agreement honored. And Patricia Whitmore is never going to sit in judgment of another father again. The next morning, Marcus received a call that confirmed his suspicions about the scope of the conspiracy. Henry Crawford's voice was strained. Mr. Pemberton, someone came to my house last night. 2 men. Said they were from the court administrator's office. What did they say? Said if I testified, my case would be reopened. Said the visitation I've been waiting 4 years for could be delayed indefinitely. Said accidents happen to people who don't know when to stop. Marcus gripped his phone tighter. Henry listened to me carefully. Did they identify themselves by name, show any credentials? No names, no badges, just suits and threats. Then they weren't from any official office. They were sent to intimidate you, and the fact that they came means they're terrified of what you know. Mr. Pemberton, I'm 73 years old. I've got a bad hip and worse knees. What am I supposed to do against people who break into offices and show up at houses? Marcus closed his eyes. Henry, I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone else. Something I need you to keep absolutely confidential until I say otherwise. I'm listening. My name is Marcus Pemberton, but my full title is Judge Marcus Elijah Pemberton of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. I'm one of 17 federal judges whose decisions are binding law for Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. Silence on the line. The people who threatened you, they don't know who they're dealing with. They think they're intimidating an ordinary citizen with no recourse. But in 2 weeks, I'm going to stand before the Judicial Conduct Commission and reveal exactly who I am. And when I do, every threat they've made, every crime they've committed, is going to become evidence in a federal civil rights investigation. Henry's breathing had changed. The fear was still there, but something else had joined it. You're a federal judge. I am. And I swear to you on my daughter's life that if you testify, I will personally ensure that your case is reviewed by a judge who actually cares about justice." More silence. Then a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "My grandson's name is Michael. He's 9 years old. I want him to know I'm his pop. I want him to remember that I never stopped fighting for him." Then fight. One more time, 2 more weeks, and I promise you Michael will know exactly who his grandfather is. That same week, Patricia Whitmore called Marcus directly. "Mr. Pemberton, this is Patricia Whitmore." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "Judge Whitmore, unexpected. I understand you've been making inquiries, talking to former litigants. I have questions about my own case." A pause. When Whitmore spoke again, her voice had shifted to something almost conciliatory. "Mr. Pemberton, I've reviewed the documentation you tried to present during your hearing. I may have been hasty in my judgment. I could schedule a rehearing, perhaps reach a different conclusion." Marcus understood immediately what was happening. Caldwell had identified him. Someone had decided that buying him off was preferable to fighting him. "That's very generous, Your Honor. I try to be fair when circumstances warrant." "And what circumstances would those be?" Another pause. "I understand you've been working with Dorothy Lawson, a troubled woman with a history of filing frivolous complaints. I would hate to see your legitimate concerns become entangled with her issues. Her issues being her documentation of 73 cases showing systematic bias in your courtroom." Silence. The conciliatory tone vanished. "Mr. Pemberton, I've been sitting on this bench for 19 years. I've survived complaints investigations and political challenges. Whatever you think you've found, it won't be enough. Judge Whitmore, in approximately 2 weeks, you're going to learn exactly who I am. And when you do, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that you had a chance to admit what you've done, and instead, you chose to threaten me. I didn't threaten anyone. No. You just offered to change your ruling if I stopped investigating. In legal terms, that's called corruption." Marcus smiled, though she could not see it. "And I have it recorded." The line went dead. Another piece of evidence. Another brick in the wall he was building. The submission to Inspector Foster took place in a gray government office that smelled of old coffee and bureaucratic inertia. Marcus arrived at 9 o'clock sharp with 237 pages of documentation in a manila envelope. Foster received him in a conference room stripped of personality. "Mr. Pemberton, you're prompt." "The evidence speaks for itself, Inspector." She took the envelope, weighed it in her hands. "You know this will be routed through standard channels. The court administrator reviews all complaints before Vincent Caldwell, Judge Whitmore's cousin by marriage, recipient of $47,000 in consulting fees from Family First Collections over the past 3 years. Foster's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "That's a serious allegation." "Serious?" "It's documented in pages 47 through 63, along with financial records showing the correlation between enforcement actions and consulting payments." She set the envelope on the table but did not open it. "Mr. Pemberton, in 12 years with this commission, I've seen exactly 3 judges removed from the bench. The system is designed to protect its own." "I'm aware." "Then why do you think this will be different?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Because in 2 weeks, when I present this evidence to the full commission, I'm going to reveal something that changes the equation entirely. Something that makes it impossible for Caldwell to bury this. And what would that be? You'll find out at the hearing, Inspector, along with everyone else." Foster studied him for a long moment. "Whatever you're planning, I hope it's as solid as you seem to think it is." "It is." "Then I'll make sure this gets to the commission directly. No administrative review, no routing through Caldwell's office." "Thank you, Inspector." "Don't thank me yet. The commission will want overwhelming evidence and absolutely no procedural vulnerabilities." Marcus stood to leave. "They'll have all of that." and something more. What? Accountability. Something that's been missing from Patricia Whitmore's courtroom for 19 years. The night before the hearing, Maya called. "Daddy, tomorrow is the big day, isn't it?" "How did you know?" "Because you sound different. You always sound different when something important is happening." "You're too smart, baby." "Daddy will win. I know it." "How do you know?" "Because Daddy loves me bigger than the sky, and people who love like that don't lose." After the call ended, Marcus looked at the photograph of Maya on his bookshelf, gap-toothed smile sand in her hair. "For you, baby girl. For all 73. The Georgia State Capitol building emerged from the pre-dawn mist. Marcus arrived at 7 o'clock 2 hours before the hearing. Dorothy texted, "Witnesses arriving." "Henry is here." Marcus replied, "I'll be inside in 30 minutes. His phone rang. Bernard Knox, Whitmore's attorney. "Mr. Pemberton, my client is prepared to offer a settlement. Full recusal from your case, written apology, agreement to undergo bias training. And in exchange, you withdraw your complaint. The evidence you've gathered never sees the light of day." "Mr. Knox, your client had 6 weeks to make this right, 6 weeks to acknowledge that 73 families were damaged by her conduct. She's acknowledging it now. No. She's trying to buy her way out of accountability. Mr. Pemberton, what you're planning could have consequences for your own career." "Mr. Knox, I've spent 32 years in the legal system. I've considered every possible consequence, and I've decided that some things are more important than my career." He ended the call and stepped out of his car. The commission chamber was filling rapidly. Dorothy was in the third row with Henry Crawford beside her. At the respondents' table, Patricia Whitmore conferred with Bernard Knox in urgent whispers. Commissioner Harold Washington took his seat. "This session of the Georgia Judicial Conduct Commission will now come to order." In the back of the chamber, Marcus Pemberton waited. 90 seconds in Patricia Whitmore's courtroom, and everything that came after. Inspector Foster's presentation consumed 90 minutes of the commission's attention. She moved through the evidence methodically, each page a brick in the wall she was constructing around Patricia Whitmore's career. At the respondents' table, Bernard Knox took copious notes, his expensive pen scratching across legal pad pages with increasing urgency. Beside him, Patricia Whitmore sat rigid, her face a mask of controlled composure that cracked slightly with each new revelation. The audio recordings were the most damaging. Foster cued them without commentary, letting the words speak for themselves. Whitmore's voice filled the chamber, preserved by the courtroom's own recording system. "People like you come in here with your printouts and your attitude. I've seen hundreds of people like you. You're all the same. Another deadbeat father with excuses." In the gallery, Henry Crawford closed his eyes. His lips moved silently, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in memory of his own 90 seconds before that bench. Commissioner Washington's expression remained neutral throughout the presentation, but his fellow commissioners showed less restraint. Commissioner Angela Price leaned forward with barely concealed intensity. Commissioner Robert Nathaniel made notes with the quick strokes of someone who had already reached conclusions. When Foster concluded, a silence descended. Washington cleared his throat. "The commission will now hear from the respondent. Judge Whitmore, you may present your defense." Patricia Whitmore did not rise. Instead, Bernard Knox stood buttoning his jacket with the practiced smoothness of an attorney who had been performing for juries his entire career. "Commissioner Washington, members of the commission, my client has served this community for 19 years. 19 years of dedicated service to the families of Fulton County. The allegations before you today represent a small fraction of the thousands of cases she has presided over, cherry-picked and manipulated to create a false narrative." He moved toward the center of the chamber, commanding attention through physical presence. "The statistical analysis presented by Inspector Foster is fundamentally flawed. It fails to account for the complexity of individual cases, the quality of documentation provided by litigants, the specific circumstances that require judicial discretion. My client cannot be held responsible for outcomes that reflect the realities of the cases before her. Commissioner Price interrupted. Mr. Knox, the audio recordings speak for themselves. Are you suggesting those are also somehow misrepresented? I'm suggesting, Commissioner, that isolated moments of frustration taken out of context do not constitute judicial misconduct. Every judge in this state has had moments of impatience. That doesn't make them unfit for the bench. Calling litigants deadbeats before reviewing their documentation isn't impatience, Mr. Knox. It's prejudgment. Knox pivoted smoothly. My client is prepared to undergo sensitivity training. She's prepared to implement procedural reforms in her courtroom. Washington held up a hand. We'll address remedies after we've heard all testimony. Does the respondent wish to add anything personally? Whitmore finally rose. Her voice when she spoke carried none of the commanding authority that had filled her courtroom. Commissioners, I have dedicated my career to the children and families of this county. If my methods have sometimes seemed harsh, it is because I believe strongly in parental responsibility. She paused, seeming to gather herself. I apologize if my communication style has been perceived as dismissive. I ask only that you consider the full scope of my service. Commissioner Nathaniel spoke for the first time. Judge Whitmore, the evidence before us suggests these are not isolated incidents. They appear to be systematic patterns. How do you explain the statistical disparity in hearing times between racial groups? I don't track those statistics, Commissioner. I treat every litigant who comes before me with equal. The data suggests otherwise. Whitmore's composure cracked visibly. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words emerged. Washington intervened. The commission will reserve further questions until after we've heard from the complainant. He shuffled papers before him. We will now hear from the primary complainant in this matter. Mr. Marcus Pemberton, please approach. In the back row, Marcus rose. The movement drew attention immediately. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the gallery. At the respondent's table, Knox's pen stopped moving. Whitmore's eyes tracked toward the source of motion, and for a moment, confusion clouded her expression. She recognized him. The man from her courtroom. The man she had called a deadbeat and threatened with jail. The man she had dismissed with 90 seconds of contempt. But why would he be here? Why would a complainant be seated in the gallery rather than at the complainant's table? Marcus walked down the center aisle with deliberate calm. His worn jacket drew sidelong glances from the professionally dressed attorneys and observers. His department store tie hung slightly crooked. His shoes, though polished, showed their age. He reached the witness table at the front of the chamber and remained standing. Washington peered at him over reading glasses. Mr. Pemberton, please be seated and state your full name for the record. I prefer to stand, Commissioner, if the commission will indulge me. A murmur ran through the gallery. Knox was already half rising from his seat, objection forming on his lips. Washington held up a hand. The commission has no objection. Please proceed. Marcus positioned himself so that he could see both the commissioners and the respondent's table. His gaze found Patricia Whitmore's and held it. My full name is Marcus Elijah Pemberton. He paused. Let the words settle. And my occupation is Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the chamber erupted. Reporters surged toward the exits, phones already pressed to ears. Camera operators abandoned their positions to capture the reaction of the commissioners. Attorneys in the gallery turned to each other with expressions of disbelief. Bernard Knox was on his feet, voice rising above the chaos. Commissioner Washington, this is outrageous. The complainant deliberately concealed his credentials. This proceeding has been compromised from the Kitu. Washington's gavel cracked against its block. Once, twice, 3 times. Order. I will have order in this chamber, or I will clear it. The tumult subsided into tense silence. Photographers continued shooting their shutters, the only sound as the commission processed what they had just heard. At the respondents' table, Patricia Whitmore had gone absolutely white. Her hands folded on the table before her trembled visibly. Her mouth worked as if trying to form words that would not come. She had threatened a federal judge with jail. She had called a federal judge a deadbeat. She had removed a federal judge from her courtroom for citing a statute. Knox regained his composure enough to make his objection coherent. Commissioner, the failure to disclose the complainant's judicial position constitutes a fundamental irregularity. My client was denied the opportunity to prepare an appropriate response. The commission should, Washington, cut him off. The commission should, Mr. Knox, dismiss evidence of systematic misconduct because the person who gathered it turned out to be qualified to evaluate judicial conduct. The complainant misrepresented himself. The complainant appeared in your client's courtroom as an ordinary citizen. He was treated the way your client treats ordinary citizens. That treatment is the subject of this proceeding. Washington's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades on the bench. Sit down, Mr. Knox. Knox sat. His face had taken on the particular pallor of an attorney who understood that his case had just collapsed. Washington turned back to Marcus. Judge Pemberton, the commission would like to understand why a sitting federal appellate judge chose to appear in a county family court without identifying himself. Marcus nodded. Commissioner, I've spent 32 years in the legal system. I've heard complaints about judicial misconduct in family courts for most of that time. Statistical analyses suggesting systematic bias. Anecdotal accounts of fathers, particularly black fathers, being denied meaningful hearings. He glanced at the gallery at Henry Crawford and Dorothy Lawson and the other witnesses who had entrusted him with their stories. But I had never experienced it personally. I needed to understand what ordinary citizens face when they enter a courtroom without credentials, without connections. The only way to understand that was to become one of them. Commissioner Price leaned forward. And what did you experience? 90 seconds. Commissioner, I was given 90 seconds to present my case before Judge Whitmore called me a deadbeat, laughed at me in open court, and had security remove me for citing a Georgia statute. She never reviewed my documentation. She never asked about my circumstances. She looked at my jacket, looked at my skin, and decided who I was before I finished my first sentence. Marcus turned to face Whitmore directly. The evidence presented by Inspector Foster documents 73 families who experienced similar treatment. Henry Crawford, 73 years old, a veteran who served this country in 2 wars, was given 90 seconds before being called a disruptive influence and denied access to his grandchildren. Tamara Jenkins, a working mother of 3, was told she should be grateful to have any custody at all. James Williams was jailed for contempt when he asked to review his own disability documentation. His voice remained level, but the words carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the chamber. These are not isolated incidents. They are systematic. They are documented. And they represent a fundamental betrayal of the judicial oath to administer justice without respect to persons. Washington spoke. Judge Pemberton, you could have revealed your identity at any point. Why pursue it this way? Because professional channels failed, Commissioner. Dorothy Lawson filed 19 formal complaints over 6 years. Every single one was buried by an administrator who is related to Judge Whitmore by marriage. The system designed to hold judges accountable was being used to protect this particular judge from accountability. He paused. I pursued it this way because I wanted this commission to evaluate the evidence based on its merit, not based on who presented it. I wanted you to see what you would have seen if Marcus Pemberton were a postal worker or a truck driver or any other citizen seeking justice. Commissioner Nathaniel spoke. You're aware that some may view your methods as unconventional. I'm aware, Commissioner. I'm also aware that 73 families have been harmed by judicial misconduct that was allowed to continue for 19 years. If my methods are questioned while their suffering is finally addressed, I can live with that trade. Whitmore finally spoke. Her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper, but the chamber was silent enough that everyone heard it. I didn't know. If I had known who you were— Marcus turned to face her. That's exactly the point, Judge Whitmore. You would have treated me differently if you had known I was a federal judge. You would have reviewed my documentation. You would have given me more than 90 seconds. You would have extended professional courtesy. His voice hardened. But I am not supposed to need professional courtesy. I am supposed to receive due process. Every citizen who walks into a courtroom is supposed to receive due process. The Constitution does not distinguish between judges and janitors, between attorneys and auto mechanics. Equal protection means equal. Whitmore's mouth opened, but no words emerged. Marcus continued. You didn't treat me badly because you didn't know I was a judge. You treated me badly because you assumed I didn't matter, because you looked at a black man in a worn jacket and decided he was a deadbeat before he opened his mouth. And you've been making that same assumption about fathers like me for 19 years. Commissioner Price spoke. Judge Pemberton, you mentioned financial connections. Can you elaborate? Vincent Caldwell, the court administrator responsible for routing complaints, received $47,000 in consulting fees from Family First Collections over the past 3 years. Family First holds the contract for child support enforcement in Fulton County. They receive 12% of every dollar collected. He let that sink in. The more cases Judge Whitmore pushes through, the more support orders she issues, the more money flows to Family First. And a portion of that money flows back to the person responsible for burying complaints about her conduct. It's not just misconduct, Commissioner. It's a scheme. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Washington's gavel restored order. Knox rose one final time. Commissioner, these allegations regarding Mr. Caldwell are beyond the scope of this proceeding. Your client is the subject of this proceeding, Mr. Knox. The Commission will determine the appropriate scope of our inquiry. Washington turned to his fellow commissioners. I believe we've heard sufficient testimony. The Commission will take a 4-hour recess to deliberate. We will reconvene at 2 o'clock to announce our findings. The gavel fell, and the chamber exploded into motion. The 4 hours of deliberation stretched into 5. Marcus waited in a small conference room away from the media frenzy that had consumed the hallways. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, from journalists, from David Thornton at the Justice Department. DOJ is prepared to move immediately if the Commission fails to act. Whatever happens in there, this isn't over. At 2:17, a clerk appeared in the doorway. Judge Pemberton, the Commission is ready. He followed her back to the chamber, which had filled beyond capacity. Marcus took a seat in the front row of the gallery. Dorothy sat beside him, gripping his hand with white-knuckled intensity. Commissioner Washington entered through a side door, followed by the other commissioners. Their expressions were solemn. The gavel fell. The Georgia Judicial Conduct Commission has concluded its deliberations regarding complaint number 2024 JCC 4471 concerning Judge Patricia Whitmore of the Fulton County Family Court. Washington paused, surveying the chamber. After reviewing the evidence presented, hearing testimony from multiple witnesses, and deliberating at length, the Commission has reached the following findings. He lifted a document and began to read. On the charge of conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice, the Commission finds this charge substantiated. A ripple of reaction ran through the gallery. On the charge of failure to afford litigants a reasonable opportunity to be heard, substantiated. On the charge of failure to dispose of matters fairly and with due regard to the rights of parties, substantiated. On the charge of manifesting bias based on race and socioeconomic status, substantiated. Each finding landed like a hammer blow. At the respondents' table, Patricia Whitmore seemed to shrink with every word. Washington continued. Based on these findings, the Commission unanimously recommends the following actions. He set down the first document and picked up another. Judge Patricia Whitmore is hereby removed from the bench effective immediately. Her judicial commission is revoked. Her pension and retirement benefits are forfeited pursuant to Georgia Code Section 15-121. Whitmore made a sound not quite a cry, not quite a gasp, the sound of a career dying. Additionally, this commission is referring all evidence of financial impropriety to the State Attorney General's office and the United States Department of Justice for investigation of potential criminal violations. Finally, this commission is ordering an immediate review of all cases decided by Judge Whitmore over the past 5 years. Any party whose case falls within the identified pattern of misconduct may petition for rehearing before a different judge. Washington set down the document and looked directly at Patricia Whitmore. Judge Whitmore, you took an oath to uphold the Constitution and administer justice fairly. The evidence before this commission demonstrates a systematic betrayal of that oath. Your conduct has damaged not only the 73 families whose cases we reviewed, but the public trust in our judicial system. His voice carried the weight of judgment. There is no place on the bench for judges who decide cases based on the color of a litigant's skin or the cut of their jacket. There is no place in our courts for the kind of contempt you showed for citizens who came before you seeking justice. The gavel fell for the final time. This proceeding is adjourned. The chamber erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Dorothy turned to Marcus, tears streaming down her face. 6 years. 6 years of being told I was tilting at windmills. 6 years of filing complaints that disappeared. They didn't disappear, Dorothy. They were buried, but buried things have a way of coming back up. Henry Crawford pushed through the crowd. He embraced Marcus with surprising strength. My grandchildren. I'm going to see my grandchildren. The commission ordered case reviews, Henry. Your petition will be among the first considered. I don't know how to thank you. See your grandson. Let him know his pop never stopped fighting. That's all the thanks I need. The aftermath unfolded with the momentum of a dam breaking. Within 24 hours, Vincent Caldwell had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Within 48 hours, federal marshals had seized records from Family First Collections. Within a week, David Thornton called to confirm that the Justice Department had opened a formal pattern or practice investigation. It's bigger than Fulton County, Marcus. We're finding similar patterns in 5 other counties. 7 judges total who appear to be part of the same network. Consent decree. That's what we're working toward. 7 years of federal oversight. Mandatory bias training. Independent monitors. And Caldwell, 14 months. He flipped on everyone above him, which limited his exposure. But he's done. Marcus thanked him and ended the call. His phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Henry saw Michael today. First time in 4 years. I've never seen a grown man cry like that. He smiled, feeling something loosen in his chest. Another text from Tamara. Case review granted. New hearing next month. Different judge. Thank you for everything. 73 families. 6 years of injustice. And finally, accountability. But there was one voice he needed to hear more than any other. He dialed and Maya's face filled his screen. Daddy. Hey, baby girl. I saw you on TV. Mommy showed me. You were talking to all those people and the lady judge looked so scared. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh in weeks. She had reason to be scared, sweetheart. Because you're a judge, too. A bigger judge than her. Something like that. Maya's expression shifted to something more serious. Daddy Brandon apologized to me today. The boy who called me a deadbeat, his mom made him. She saw you on TV, too. She said she was wrong about you. She said you're a hero. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I'm not a hero, baby. I'm just a father who loves his daughter. That's what heroes are, Daddy. People who love so much they can't stop fighting. He could not speak for a moment. Maya. Yeah, Daddy. Summer's coming up. And I was thinking maybe we could spend some time at the beach. Just you and me. I'd like that, Daddy. Me too, sweetheart. 1 year later. The beach at Tybee Island stretched golden under the late afternoon sun. Waves rolled in with the particular rhythm of the Georgia coast, gentle enough for children strong enough to remind you that the ocean was always in charge. Marcus sat on a weathered wooden bench, watching Maya play in the shallows. 9 years old now. Her gap-toothed smile had filled in new teeth, replacing the ones she had lost. Her hair flew loose in the wind. She looked so much like Eleanor that sometimes it hurt to breathe. The reforms had taken root. The consent decree covered 5 counties now, with federal monitors ensuring compliance for the next 7 years. The 73 families whose cases Dorothy had documented had all received new hearings. Most had seen different outcomes the second time around. Henry Crawford visited his grandson Michael every other weekend now. They went fishing on Saturday mornings, the old man and the boy rebuilding a bond that should never have been severed. Dorothy Lawson had founded an organization, the Family Justice Initiative, with offices in 3 states and a staff of 32. Patricia Whitmore had died in her sleep 8 months after her removal from the bench. The obituary mentioned her 19 years of service. It did not mention the 73 families. Vincent Caldwell was serving 14 months. Family First Collections had been dissolved. Maya ran up from the water sand, clinging to her legs, a shell clutched in her palm. "Look what I found, Daddy!" She held it up for his inspection. A perfect scallop shell, ridged and pale, worn smooth by years of tumbling through the surf. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She climbed onto the bench beside him, tucking herself under his arm with the practiced ease of a child who had spent 9 years finding exactly the right fit. "Daddy, can I ask you something? Anything, baby. When you went to that court, the one with the mean judge, why didn't you just tell them who you were? Why did you let her treat you like that?" Marcus considered the question. "Because I needed to understand, sweetheart. I needed to know what it felt like to be powerless in a place that was supposed to protect me. I wanted to understand what they experienced so I could help make it better." Did it work? Is it better now? Marcus thought about Henry Crawford and his grandson, about Tamara Jenkins and her children, about the 73 families who had finally received the justice they deserved. It's better than it was, but it's not as good as it should be. Will it ever be good enough? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. Justice isn't a place you arrive at, Maya. Justice is a direction you travel. And as long as there are people willing to keep walking, we get a little closer every day. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Daddy, yeah, do you love me bigger than the sky?" The ritual question asked 10,000 times over 9 years. The question that anchored them both to something that could never be taken away. Marcus pulled his daughter close, feeling her heartbeat against his ribs. "Bigger than the sky, baby girl. Bigger than all the stars and all the space between them. Bigger than anything." Maya smiled. "That's a lot of love, Daddy." "It's exactly the right amount." They sat together on the bench, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The water turned gold, then orange, then the deep purple of approaching night. And somewhere in the darkness, the promise of another dawn.